Colin Dixon with nScreenMedia, and I'm at the ETIA conference in Stanford, and I'm talking with Jim Berger, who is a lawyer at Thompson Coburn LLP. And Jim, you just gave a really fascinating summary of where we are with net neutrality. So can you just update us on that?
Thank you, Colin. Well, the first thing is the FCC promulgated a rule saying that the information service providers are no longer information service providers. They're telecommunication providers, which means they're regulated much more closely. The regulations said no blocking, no throttling, no paid prioritization, i.e. they have to treat all the edge providers and their customers the same. Plus they have to be transparent to their customers with respect to their rules, the speed, what they promise customers. Well, not surprisingly, the internet service providers appealed that case. And in administrative law, the FCC case gets appealed directly to a court of appeals, not to a district judge. So the case was given to the District of Columbia U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. The providers threw the proverbial book at the FCC, thinking of every way an administrative provision could be overturned. Arbitrary, capricious. Most importantly, though, they said that the FCC didn't have the power to make them telecommunications providers, because under the law, the statute, it said that information service providers are ISPs, and the Supreme Court has said that's clearly so. So, interestingly enough, though, the service providers said to the court, "You got to stay the FCC action. The world's going to end if the FCC action goes into effect." I'm overstating it, but essentially, to get a stay, you have to show that there's irreparable harm that can't be cured, by money alone. And they have to show a high probability of success on the merits. Now, the court's decision was interesting, and they didn't articulate very long the reasons. They just simply said, petitioners, you haven't met the heavy burden of sustaining a stay. So no stay was granted.
So there's a couple of directions that things can go in now, right? It'll be in the appeals court, and it could go to appeal, right? How long will that process take?
Well, it's hard to say how they set the schedule. And we do have the summer when the courts are very slow. Usually nothing happens in August. So the question is whether they'll schedule briefs and oral argument before the summer. If that's the case, there's a fair chance that late fall or early winter of this year, the court will issue an opinion. If the ISPs lose, I would bet they will file a petition, what's called petition for certiorari, asking the Supreme Court to hear the case. The Supreme Court doesn't have to hear the case, by the way. It's discretionary to grant the petition. If the FCC loses, I say the odds are smaller than they will appeal. The government can always appeal; it's possible, but in the past they haven't appealed the Court of Appeals decisions on net neutrality. But again, when that happens, it's going to be crucial, because we're talking, if it extends much longer, and sometimes the Court of Appeals cases take a long time. The court has to chew it over. I don't think it'll go into the next presidential term, which is another interesting question. What happens if a Republican gets named president? Of course, he can replace somebody who resigns, a Democrat, so there are 3 Republicans, and they could overturn their own decision if that happens.
And so what would happen then? The FCC would just withdraw the rule?
Yeah, that I don't see that happening under Chairman Wheeler. I really don't. I think he will keep the rule in place. But I think it's really more in terms of during a Supreme Court appeal if that happens. They would file a petition immediately after losing the Court of Appeals. Well, let me take that back. There is another process before the Supreme Court, which is they could ask the entire D.C. Circuit. There are only 3 judges on a panel, and I can't remember the total number of judges for you. Maybe there are 9 or so, maybe more, circuit court judges. They could say, please, the entire court, every judge, hear our appeal. We disagree with the 3 judges. And there have been decisions overturned by an en banc panel, but it's not usual. Usually they support their own. So that's a possible intermediate step. I don't think that. I think they'll file the petition for cert. Now, if the Supreme Court will take its time to decide that, it may ask, well, in this case, the FCC may work with the Solicitor General. In fact, the Solicitor General will be the lawyer for the FCC in the Supreme Court. So that's going to be interesting, a Supreme Court case. How does that come out? I think it's a close call. It's going to be a 5. I would bet a 5-4 decision. Clearly, Thomas Scalia and Alito will be against the rule, and the question is, will they get 2 more judges to join them? I don't know. Like Judge Roberts, he might join them. That doesn't make a majority yet. I really, it's a close call. If I had to predict, I'd say 60-40 that the rule will be upheld, but I wouldn't bet my next paycheck on it. That's for sure. Could be a long process, because if they don't grant the petition for several months, then they have to have briefs and oral argument, and the Supreme Court quits at the end of June. So it might go over into the next session during the presidential election, which would be interesting. Then, the Supreme Court can take its time in writing its decision.
So we could be looking at even stretching into 2017 before we get resolution of this.
This is definitely possible, Colin. I think that if it goes to the Supreme Court, there's a good chance that it'll go into the next administration, which makes it very interesting as to who gets elected.
But for the time being, at least, the rule is being enforced.
Yeah, it is, and there's a little bit of an irony here, because the FCC didn't apply all of the Title II rules to the ISPs, because there's a number of really, like filing tariffs and a whole bunch of stuff that you don't want to make the internet service providers do. But one of the things they left in place is hearing complaints about rates and services. And today, there was a filing against Comcast, and there's also a filing against AT&T. So it looks like, even though they said we're really not going to regulate rates, they're going to be forced to deal with these petitions. And I have mixed emotions about net neutrality. I believe in the open internet. On the other hand, I've spent a lot of time in administrative law and IP law, and there's a big difference between the two. There's no real agency regulating copyright and patents. Yeah, you have the patent office and the copyright office, but they don't really regulate in the sense of administrative agencies. Administrative agencies take a life of their own, and I really wonder what if the rules upheld, what the FCC and regulations of internet providers will look 5 or 10 years from now.
Yeah, it looks like whatever happens, we're in for a long haul, it sounds like. Jim, thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. I appreciate it.
This has been Colin Dixon with nScreenMedia.